What is going on, everyone? Today I'm going to be giving you a spoiler-free review for Joker Folie, Deux, also known as Joker 2. So I just got done seeing it at an early IMAX special event screening, and it was an incredible experience seeing this in IMAX. Obviously, seeing a movie a bit early is always going to be kind of exciting because not many people have seen it yet, not many people even have reviews out, so you don't really know what the general public's going to feel about the movie, and getting to see it before that is just always going to be somewhat exciting. As we always do, we're going to go through the positives, the negatives, and then give the movie a rating out of 10. Again, this is going to be completely spoiler-free. I will be doing another video talking all about spoilers because there's definitely a lot of spoilers that we're going to be able to go into, but for this video, spoiler-free. Starting off with the positives, the movie is visually gorgeous, just like the first one. I was fully expecting this. The cinematography is incredible. The color grading, just the way everything looks visually is outstanding. There are so many incredible shots in this movie, so many unique shots, so many creative shots. And yes, like I said, it's very consistent with that first film. I think the first film is also visually gorgeous. There's not a single part of this movie that feels anything less than really amazing quality. So know that going into this, you're never going to see a scene that looks off, looks a bit weird. Everything looks amazing. But obviously visuals can only take a movie so far. So how was the actual story, the narrative, the writing? I actually do think it worked really well throughout most of the movie. There is a lot of context added to the character of Arthur Fleck in this movie that I was not expecting to see. Obviously, I was expecting to have a lot of new stuff with his romance with Harley Quinn, but in terms of just the character of Arthur Fleck himself, what sorts of new things will we learn about him? I wasn't expecting any of that, but we actually do get some new context to it, and it actually makes the first film almost kind of work differently in a sense. At least you just know more about him. You know more about his backstory, his life, and I, again, was not expecting that. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not like necessarily huge things, but it's things that are big enough to at least let you see more into this character and understand him more. And I mean, before the movie came out, when it first got announced that it was even going to happen in the first place, everyone and their mother was saying that this movie does not need a sequel. So many people, that was their first response when they heard that a Joker sequel was coming out. And don't get me wrong, I kind of originally thought that when the first movie came out. I was like, oh, that's all we need. We don't need another one. That's fine. And I stand by that, but it doesn't really matter though, because I don't really think sequels ever need to exist. They're just sequels. That's what they are. They're a movie that comes after a different one. You don't need to follow up anything. You can just leave it as is if you want. That's fine. But you can do another one, and they did decide to do one here because they had an idea and they went for it, and I'm definitely glad that they did. But I will say this movie does act more as an epilogue as opposed to a sequel. Obviously, we can just get technical with the words there because, you know, they might not really mean that different to you depending on who you are, but I don't really get the sense that this feels like a sequel. It felt more like, let's see the aftermath of what happened in the first film. Let's see what's going on with Joker after that first film. It doesn't feel like a sequel. It's really hard to explain, but when you watch the movie, I think you'll understand what I mean. The movie's whole focus is on the aftermath. Everything builds off of that first film. It's not like a whole new story with Joker. It's basically building off of what we saw previously. The only like new aspect that is completely separate from the first movie is of course the character of Harley Quinn. And I do think her part in this movie is actually really good. She has her own character, of course, but a lot of what her character is meant for is to give Arthur hope. It's to give Arthur the feeling of belonging to someone, to actually having someone that is, you know, more intimately caring for them. Obviously, the first movie ends with him feeling that way, but in a different way, not the intimate part of it. It was just the idea that there's people out there who now idolize him. There's people out there who care about him and actually know he exists. But once he got thrown to Arkham, he's now thinking to himself, well, I'm basically like better off dead. Like there's nothing going on with him anymore. He's not seeing what's going on the outside. He doesn't know what's going on in Gotham, and he doesn't really feel much of anything anymore. Once Harley comes into his life, it kind of just shakes things up quite a bit. So her role is really important, and she has a character to herself as well. You learn a lot about her. You learn why she has this idolization of Arthur. Why is she obsessed with him? And there is a lot to that. Obviously, I can't go into the details because there's a lot of spoilers there, but a lot of it worked for me. A lot of the movie focuses on Arthur's trial, which, like I said, that's kind of why it feels like an epilogue, because it's dealing with something that happened in the first movie. And I think a lot of the conversations surrounding this trial is actually really brilliantly handled. The dialogue is solid because It is conversations that people in real life were having about that first movie after it came out, discussing what his possible mental illnesses are, what his motivations were. Like, all these conversations are being had by other characters in this movie, and a lot of it is really interesting to hear these characters say these things. And there are a lot of new perspectives that are brought up from various characters that I honestly didn't really even think about. But obviously everyone's going to be questioning what the hell is going on with the musical sequences in this movie. Why is it a musical? Why did they decide to do that? Obviously, I'm not going to go into too much detail with how the musical sequences work here, because I do think it is important you go into it not knowing the full context of it, because trust me, there's some really interesting things they do with the music here that I think is definitely worth not knowing specifics. But just generally speaking, I will say that if you are the type of person who absolutely hates musicals, you're probably not going to love this movie, because yes, it is a musical. I know they tried to say in the marketing that it's not really a musical. They tried to use that lingo, and it definitely doesn't feel like a traditional musical in the sense that the way the music is presented is not the same as traditional musicals. But there are still a lot of moments that do include the characters singing. So yes, if you hate musicals, maybe this movie's not going to be for you, and that's okay. You don't have to go see it. But I do think if you're one that's like, you love musicals, or if you're at least open to them, then you will definitely get a lot more out of this movie. And the reason it doesn't really feel like a traditional musical is because usually traditional musicals have original songs that are made for the characters. Basically, it's just the characters speaking normal dialogue, but instead of speaking the dialogue, they're singing it. That's usually how musicals work, where, you know, they're just having a scene, they're talking, and then randomly they just start singing instead of talking. Like, that's a lot of times how musicals work. And I think people just kind of see that as a bit too cheesy. It's a bit weird, but this is not how the music works in this movie at all. Like, it's not meant to be their dialogue and they're just singing it back and forth to each other. It's not like that. So don't go into it thinking it's going to be like you're watching a play on Broadway. No, it's not like that. The songs are literally just real songs that they're singing to each other. Now, the actual lyrics of the songs do have meaning and do matter to what's happening in the movie. Don't get me wrong. It's not just random words coming out of their mouths. The lyrics to these songs have a lot of huge importances to these scenes. But so do most songs that are played in most movies. I don't know if you guys ever, listen to the actual lyrics of the songs that are being played into movies, but usually those songs have some sort of story importance to what's going on. They don't just throw random songs in just because they sound cool. Usually there's some importance to the lyrics in those songs that matter to the movie. I mean, even just look at the first Joker, the song That's Life that kept playing a couple times in the movie. It played because the lyrics were really important to the movie. The Smile song as well, like those songs all had such deep importance to the story. Same thing with this movie. It's not like these characters are just singing their dialogue. It's not like that. They are simply singing real songs. And you might be wondering, why the hell are they singing real songs? You'll understand it watching the movie. That's all I'm going to say. You'll understand it. And I think it's definitely not as overbearing or out there as most musicals. Just to give some, clarity there, because I know a lot of people are going to say like, oh, I'm not like a big fan of musicals, but like it's not really like a traditional one though. But I definitely would still classify it as a musical, at least personally. But in terms of how they're described, how the sequences work, I like them. I don't think they're out of place, and I do think a lot of us being so surprised about it being a musical, I feel like we weren't paying close enough attention to the first movie, because the first movie makes it pretty clear that Arthur frequently dances in that movie to escape reality. So what is the next thing to do after dancing? Singing. It's like the next step. It's the next thing you do. So I feel like it really isn't out of place. The first movie had frequent dance sequences where Arthur's just going at it. He's just going with the flow. He's just dancing. And that's what happens in this movie, but it's with singing. So it's just a bit different, but I think it works, and it actually follows up the first movie quite nicely. The movie's also surprisingly really funny, and maybe I shouldn't say surprisingly, because it kind of makes sense. I mean, the first movie, Arthur basically embraces being Joker at the very end. And in this movie, he's doing that as well. He's embracing that role. And obviously that means he's going to be throwing out a lot of comedy. And, I know there was a whole point about him not being funny in the first one, but he actually really has like a funny sort of awkward humor to him that actually works really well. And there's a lot of like maybe unintentional humor moments here as well, but there's a lot of moments where my theater laughed out loud quite a bit. Some of it was like the type of humor I was not expecting in a modern movie, actually. Some of it was like really like out there, but I was like, okay, you know, it actually works, to be honest. It's just like, it's a surprise to hear that type of humor today. But then they'll follow up a really funny scene with like one of the most emotional moments in the movie, and I'm not going to say what scene it is, but it did make me cry. I was tearing up, I will say. And of course, the acting by Joaquin Phoenix, Lady Gaga, and also Brendan Gleeson was a huge part of this movie, and he was really great. I really enjoyed his role in this film. I was not expecting to get so much out of him, but he was really solid. But Lady Gaga and Joaquin Phoenix, I mean, the acting obviously was phenomenal, and the singing was also phenomenal. I mean, of course, Lady Gaga, I was expecting her singing to be great, but Joaquin Phoenix was not expecting him to be as good as he was, but he was. And Lady Gaga, I mean, I've only seen her in American Horror Stories. It's the only thing outside of this I've seen her in, and she was great in that, but she's also really great here. She's actually got some of the best scenes in the movie, in my opinion. And Joaquin Phoenix, although it's definitely not as good of a performance as he was in the first movie, it still is fantastic, and he follows up the character of Arthur Fleck with another amazing performance. And the last positive I want to give is I really do feel like the world building was actually pretty cool in this movie, in particular with some things they do towards the end of the movie. And obviously I can't go into specifics, but it was pretty cool to see. There's a couple of things, if you're a fan of the comic books and you're a fan of just the character, you know, of Joker, and a lot of things revolving around the Batman characters in the universe, there's some interesting things that you'll notice and you'll be like, that's kind of cool. It doesn't really mean anything because they're not making a universe out of this as far as I'm aware. I mean, maybe they will in the future. I have no idea. But as far as I'm aware, this is a very separate thing from everything else. But it's just cool to see. There's a little couple things there that I'm like, oh, it was a cool little Easter egg, and a couple other things that are a bit bigger, but you'll like them. Trust me, you'll like them if you're a fan of Batman. But now we got to get into the negatives. Unfortunately, there are a few negatives, and one of them really hurts because this movie is so close to being like a perfect film for me, but I just feel like this was such a big thing that I just really got annoyed with. And this has to do with the end of the movie, not like the final moments necessarily, but like the last, I want to say like 15 minutes of the movie. I just wasn't really a fan of how things wrapped up, which is so frustrating because so much of the movie was incredible. I was just boasting about how amazing like the first, 90% of the movie was, but I just don't like how they wrapped it up. It felt kind of rushed in a sense, and it's not necessarily what happens in the end, it's more so just how it's executed. Like everything just felt so fast, and there's certain things with Harley Quinn's character that I don't really like what they did in the end with it. I don't like how her arc finished, and it almost felt kind of unsatisfying and incomplete in a sense, and it really is a big negative for me. Like a lot of times with these movies, I'm like, okay, I like the movie a lot. There's a couple of negatives we can go into, and they're minor negatives. This is not really a minor negative. I feel like it's a big thing that it's like the one thing I've been thinking about as I left this movie, which is so frustrating because so much, like I said, so much movie is so damn good. There's just this one thing I don't think I like how this wrapped up. I don't enjoy the ending of this movie. I don't think it's bad necessarily. I just think it kind of undermines a lot of what the movie was already doing. And again, I want to reiterate, it's not what happens, it's just the execution of it all. You know what I mean? So I can't really go into specifics. There's a lot of spoilers to talk about throughout all this movie, to be honest, which we will talk about in a spoiler video. But I can't help but feel very annoyed with how the movie wrapped up. The last negative I want to give actually has to do with the musical sequences, because although I mentioned I like how the music was presented in this movie, I don't think it was, too much. I don't think it was, a kind of an annoying, like cheesy musical in a sense, which I don't mind those types of musicals, don't get me wrong, but I don't think that would have worked for a movie like this. My issue was the fact that I feel like there wasn't enough like grand scale musical sequences. There's a couple of them, don't get me wrong, there's a couple of really cool ones, they show them off in the trailer, but a lot of them are also like standstill music scenes where the characters just are sitting and singing. Like they're not doing anything, they're just sitting in a singular spot, singing their song, and that's it. And I was like, I don't know, like I kind of wish they did more with more of the musical sequences. Why not have the characters get up and dance and jump around the room like they do in most musicals? I feel like that would have been a little bit better, but there's a lot of them, trust me, there's a lot of scenes in the movie where it's just Arthur or Harley just singing and they're just sitting there like they're just singing. It's great singing, don't get me wrong, but like do a little more with the character. Like, I don't know, go have them do something. Again, make it so it's, you know, in their head, so they're not like, obviously it wouldn't make sense in some of the scenes for them to be like actively doing crazy things, but just go a little bit further with it. There's a couple scenes like that, trust me, and some of them are amazing. But there's also other ones where I'm like, you know, they could have done a little more with it here. It's just a little bit less interesting because you go from such a great musical sequence to one that's not as great. Even if the song's really good, it doesn't matter if the visuals aren't as good. You know what I mean? One last thing I want to say before I get into the rating, I do genuinely feel like a lot of people are going to hate this movie. Just straight up. I think I got a lot out of it, and you'll see with my rating how much I really enjoyed it. But I do think it's just not going to be a movie most people are going to like or appreciate, especially because I feel like the first movie attracted such a large audience for, you know, a very different reason than what this movie is. This movie is so distinctly different, even though I do feel like it's building up a lot of what the first one did. It's in a very different way, and I don't think most people are going to be able to appreciate that or enjoy it. Even though I got a lot out of it, I don't think most people will. So just want to say that right off the bat as well. If you go into this hating it, I'm not surprised. I'm really not. I think a lot of people won't. If you already didn't like the first one, you're probably not gonna like this one either, unless you get something out of the boldness of it, I guess. But I really think this is gonna be, I think it's gonna have a low rating. I don't think people are gonna be thrilled about it. But that's all I have to say for this movie in terms of the non-spoiler review. We're gonna get into spoilers another video. But for a rating out of 10, I'm going to give this a solid 9.5 out of 10. It really hurts because I feel like this could be a 10 out of 10 movie for me. I really do think it could live up to the first one. I just personally feel like there's a couple things here that hold it back just a bit. And I do think the ending was a big part of that, unfortunately. Even though I still love the movie, I had a great time with it. And I hope you all go see it and check it out for yourselves because trust me, it is a solid film. It follows up the first one quite well. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. I will see you all in my next one. Peace out.